Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Heat from 1995. So, this movie obviously is to be the go-to movie for its genre, for the robbery crime genre. A lot of people would probably go on and also say movies like Point Break, or eventually a lot of the films that I'm to go on and probably mention soon here that are to have possibly been inspired by this film. So, speaking of which, you can't help but go on and say, now that I've seen this movie for the very first time, that this movie does look fairly similar to movies like The Dark Knight, or maybe even movies within its genre like The Marauders, or eventually I can't help but think that Den of Thieves and Heat. Den of Thieves does kind of feel like the remake of Heat in a lot of ways. And Den of Thieves also does go on and has like a better pacing. It has a much more baffling, fascinating story than Heat does, in all honesty. But Heat does have some good things about it. It's just the long stretch of a film that you have to go through, where there is so many backstories that you have to give so many characters, to the point where I'm like, do we really need the getaway driver that is played by Dennis Haysbert? Does he need to have a whole backstory? Donald Breeden, that character. Do we really need to have this character, like, have this whole story of him being a cook and that not working out, and him be like desperately tied to Neil, who is played by Robert De Niro in this movie? I'm like, why did we even have to have the whole backstory of that character? That just feels like a whole stretch of things. But not only that, there's so many names that are just thrown within this film that, like, it's kind of tough to follow the bouncing ball of whenever anybody is to eventually be talking through a phone and referencing anybody. Because I'm like, wait a minute, who is that? Who is this person? I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know all of these people backwards and forwards like this movie immediately thinks that I do. But we also have some really funny moments in this movie where, of course, Al Pacino is to go on and mention to Alan how, of course, Ashley Judd's character has a great ass. She's got a great ass. ASS. So immediately, like, I heavily chuckled at that moment. But yeah, so we go on into this film and we have so many freaking backstories that I think it, like, goes on and just has me going like, man, I'm freaking exhausted while watching this film, to the point where I'm like, okay, like, I just want to go on and have like certain scenes just be in the background, especially when there's so often so many things where people are just kind of sitting around having this chit chat about things, and we're just like, really? Like, you're gonna be sitting at a table just bickering back and forth? Okay, whatever. Like, you've really slowed down this film. Um, and I kind of would rather keep have a movie be playing in the background, because this is a long stretch of a film, than being glued every single second, because there's just some parts where, like, there's obviously some slow down moments in this movie. But yeah, for this film, I would immediately go on and say that I feel like this movie is an okay film, simply because I am not a person that is to thoroughly enjoy a detective crime genre film. So my grading, of course, gets skewed. And plus, also, when really looking at Den of Thieves, I would immediately go on and say, like, why not watch Den of Thieves much more so than Heat? Just because Den of Thieves is just a better film in my mind. So, and a lot of people would debate me and bicker and whatever, but that's just my opinion. But anyways, so with that said, I think it's about that time to just go on and mention where can you see this film. Because I think right now, currently, at some points, this movie did say that it was in like stars, going through certain areas and checking on things. But I'll also give you a number of bootlegish like apps that you can hopefully go on and see this movie for absolutely free. So first off, with that said, a number of apps that I'm gonna rattle off here. You can probably go into a Google Play Store and find a variation of this same similar app to conveniently be able to download and be able to see these movies for absolutely free. So there's my first suggestion. But then also going on into a Google search, you can search the word C Movies app, so letter C. Hopefully you can go on and find this app and be able to find out that the current variation of this app is called Yes Movies, and you'll be able to download that after you get into letter C Movies. And you can also go into an app called Fox HD Movies. The title of the logo will be different than Fox HD Movies, which the logo will actually be Fox HD Movies. The title will actually say this movie played 1080p HD movies. Or the title of the app, not the movie. The app. And then thirdly, you can go on to a Google Play Store and search the words 123 Movies and hopefully be able to find this app. But if not, you can go through a Google search and be able to put in the words TV Crush and find out that TV Crush had changed its logo and whatever to eventually be HD Movies 123 Movies. You can be able to download this app that has a number of words said HD Movies, so the king crown off the side. Download this app, be able to say that you can see a number of movies for absolutely free. So now that I've said all that, I've mentioned all of that to you. Now, let's go on and go into spoilers about this movie. Hopefully I'm going to be able to remember everything because there's so many things going on in this film. So, every single character has a backstory. Every single character. So let's go on and let's possibly rattle some of those things off at some point in this film. So, for backstories, we, of course, have Al Pacino's character, who's Lieutenant Vincent Hanna, who eventually is to be having a marriage that is on the rocks, to the point of him going on and not only screaming words like, "She's got a great ass!" but then also going on and having Vincent, who eventually is to be having problems with his marriage to the point of Christine or Justine eventually going and looking for another man and having this relationship possibly be on the rocks because Vincent is never really there. We even have at one point that Natalie Portman in the early stages of this film is dealing with the problem of this marriage by maybe lashing out and having her own problems to deal with within this film, and so on and so forth. We have Neil at one point who is to go on and find a girl who is to go by the name of Edie, and eventually he is to be fascinated by her because she is fascinated in him, and so eventually they go on and have this kind of very brief but interesting relationship. And then Neil, who is to lie about who he is, eventually tells Edie the truth by the end of this film. And so, one thing that I also need to mention. The show FX The Old Man. It kind of feels like The Old Man feels a lot like this movie in some ways, as far as certain visuals. I can't help but in the pilot episode where like John Lithgow is in that airplane hangar, like reminds me of the ending of this film, and so much about uh, that show kind of reminds me of this. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. But anyways, so we have Chris. Chris is to be played by Val Kilmer, and he is to be tied with Ashley Judd's character, who, of course, he is having some relationship problems, and it seems that his relationship is slowly but surely slipping away, to the point where Neil is to come in and to tell Ashley Judd's character that she should give Chris one more chance, and eventually it seems that the both of them and their relationship is working out, and Ashley Judd's character is to have this kid named Dominic, and she, of course, to be taking care of him. But not only that, we have a whole getaway driver that ends up being put into the later part of this film, who is to be this kind of short order cook, and he is to have this whole backstory with this girl that eventually just leads him into becoming this getaway driver that he ends up just getting killed in this film. And what a waste of time, honestly, that character was. To have this whole backstory for no good reason, to just kill time. But, like, I like Dennis Haysbert, but, man, just what was the point of that character? So anyways, let's go on to the very beginning of this film. So we of course have Neil, who is to be in this ambulance driver get up, and he is going on to make his way to get this, to steal this ambulance. We have Chris, who is going on and getting a certain number of explosives and writing them off as him being from Jack's Construction. And we have Trejo, who is actually played by Danny Trejo, that is to also be in his own vehicle and kind of telling the guys where this armored truck is going, as we start to have guys like Tom Sizemore, who's playing Michael in this film, who eventually used to pick up a guy named Waingro, who eventually is to be the newcomer to this robbery, or to this heist team. And Waingro is talking to Michael and mentioning, like, hey, you guys must have been working for a while, and yeah, they work all the time. And Waingro is like, well, hey, maybe I can go on and do a couple of jobs with you guys. Yeah, that seems to have a very short shelf life in this film. Plus, also, we have a number of characters that have to build up to eventually them getting killed off in this movie. But, so we go on into this first heist that, of course, be like the exciting thrill of it all. And so, we of course have Neil, who is to eventually have his ambulance that is to stop this armored truck in its tracks, and then eventually go on to have a number of these other massive trucks kind of go on and smash into this armored car, tipping it over. And then they go on and they put explosives by the door to open this door. And then they go on to eventually pull all these guys out. We have at one point where Chris is to try and push this guy back, one of the police officers. And come to find out, when Chris to try to continue to talk to this officer, we have Michael that is telling Chris, it's like, well, hey, like, you do realize because of the blood that is coming out of these guys' ears that they can't hear you. That no matter what you're saying to them, they don't understand. So we have Neil coming into this armored car, stealing only the the bonds. And so we go on and we have Neil who steals all of this because that's all he has time for. And then they eventually put these kind of spikes onto the road to where a number of the police officers are driving their way to try to chase after these guys to eventually have all their tires be popped. So we have the guys going on and getting into their getaway vehicle and chucking this kind of bleach bomb thing into this vehicle to eventually scramble and get out of there. So we go on and have Lieutenant Vincent Hanna, who is at home with his wife, Justine, who they are to have gone on and kissed one another and so on and so forth. It seems that Vincent is to be going through his third marriage, supposedly through this film, and how it seems that is to happen is Vincent is to consistently have his job be more important than his family. So Vincent is to go on, and in the very beginning of this film, all of a sudden have Lauren come in, and she is to soon be picked up by her father. And so Lauren is asking Justine about these certain kind of accessories. Like, I'm not quite sure exactly what they were. And so we have Lauren, who more and more is getting very antsy because she doesn't want to be late, and like we even have Vincent, who is to ask Justine, it's like, well, is her father even coming? Like, for how this guy is to always seem to not really be there for his own daughter. Like, is he really going to be here today? So we have Lauren, who's getting even more and more antsy with Justine, and is to want Justine to kind of stop whatever she's doing to help Lauren figure this out. To where, of course, Lauren is to kind of break down, and Justine is to try to comfort her. So, pushing past that, we go on into this film, and we have Vincent, who eventually is to go on and find out the aftermath of this whole case, where we, of course, have guys like Bosco, who is played by Ted Levine, who is explaining to Vincent how everything was to break down and how a number of these guards were all to be killed. And because we, of course, have Waingro, who ends up jumping the gun and killing a number of these guys off, to the point where a number of these heist guys, specifically Neil, is to be very upset with Waingro, to the point of Waingro explaining while they're at this diner, it's like, well, hey, I had to shoot this guy. And Neil taking Waingro into this parking lot and almost wanting to shoot him, but realizing that there is police nearby, and Waingro is to sneak away from Neil and possibly have Neil want to chase after him later on in the film and try and kill him off, as well as a number of other people. So we have Neil, who goes on and gives Nate, who is played by Jon Voight, a number of the things that they were to go on and heist. So Nate is to mention that it seems that one of the bonds that they had grabbed is from a guy named Van Zant, who a lot of people know as William Fichtner. And funny enough, William was also to be in The Dark Knight, probably either by coincidence or really just from the fact of, like, well, hey, I wanted to get somebody from the movie Heat, and why not get William, because he's a great actor also. So we go on and we have, of course, Nate, who is to go on and explain that they could get a pretty good payout from Van Zant, because this guy, of course, will want to have his business go on normally, and instead of having to go through all the hassle of getting all these bonds together. So we, of course, have them go on and try to sell back these bonds to this guy. And of course, Van Zant is to be upset about that to the point of him wanting to go on and have Henry Rollins, who is playing Hugh Benny in this movie. Really enjoy Henry Rollins. Really enjoy a lot of his stand up. Um, but so we have Van Zant, who is to tell Hugh that he wants these guys dead for taking his bonds, because he wants to eventually let anybody know if anybody F's with him that they're going to end up dead. Like it's a whole reputation kind of thing. So we go on into this film, and I'm just going to kind of cover like some like certain items that happen within this film. Not perfectly put within this film because there's just a lot of stuff that happens in this film also. So we go on and we seem to have a number of phone calls that end up taking place between Neil and Van Zant to eventually get this deal brokered. And so eventually we have this one guy bringing this box to Neil. And what ends up happening is that Chris's character is watching as Neil is getting this delivery via this car and notices that there is to be a guy who is coming from behind and trying to get to Neil. Neil runs him over and then goes on to have both Neil and both Chris shooting both of these men down via either a weapon of sorts, like a sniper rifle, or to have Neil kind of shoot these guys down with his own weapon. So Neil, after this whole thing is to happen, Neil, of course, is to be upset and is to find out that they didn't even get any real legit payment from this from these people, that there never was going to be. So Neil goes on and calls Van Zant and is to tell him, like, I'm talking to no one. And Van Zant is like, what do you mean? Neil's like, because right now I'm talking to a dead man. And it's like, ooh, all right. So, like, we're going to see, like, the build of that. So, we go on and we have Van Zant, who is to be consistently in his office to possibly have security being upped from the possible threat of his death. So, we get to the point where Van Zant is to use Trejo's family to hold them hostage to eventually get Trejo, who is to back out of one of their heists. And eventually Neil gets suspicious about that and goes on and sees Trejo, who is now battered and bloody and close to near death. And Trejo is to tell Neil what had happened. And eventually Neil is to shoot Trejo and then go after Van Zant and kill him also. So, but anyways, let's go on here. So eventually we have Vincent, who is to try to figure out who the new heavy hitters are. And so eventually Vincent is to go on and speak with guys like Albert to try to figure out who who these guys could possibly be. So Vincent is trying to squeeze Albert for anything he's worth, and Albert is saying, like, well, he doesn't have any information, but he knows a guy who eventually will. The guy who actually used to be played by Tom Luke, who is actually Richard. So we have Vincent that is telling Albert that he needs to be there alongside Richard, so Vincent knows that this is all legit. So Vincent then goes on and is to speak to Albert and speak to Richard, and eventually is to go on and find out that uh, that Michael Chirito is to be one of these heist members. And so that goes on and has Vincent to not only track down Michael, but then Vincent is to tell the guys that he's working with, it's like, well, hey, I want you to go on and follow Michael, but then I want you to also follow Michael's friends and follow their friends and their friend. And so, like, this leads to, like, Vincent saying, like, and I wanted this all done yesterday kind of thing. So, we have Michael being tracked down to having him have this kind of get together, this dinner with a number of people that have Chris and have Neil and have all of these people eating dinner together to showcase that Michael is to go on and give his woman jewelry. And so, as Michael and a bunch of these people are all leaving, we have Neil, who is to go on and talk to Edie for the second time and want to get together with her. Because in the very first original time, Neil is to go on and make his way to this bookstore and buy this certain book about titanium, trying to figure out how to like do away with certain metals. And so Neil is to go on and get this book at this place, and then is to sit down by this restaurant, and all of a sudden he bumps into Edie, and Edie's like, oh, like, what book did you get it? And, like, all of a sudden they just have this conversation with one another, and all of a sudden it just, like, they go from immediately going to this place and to going to bed together so quickly, because it seems that they were really, they really enjoyed one another's company. So Neil is to go on that he does miss Edie, and Edie was thinking that this was probably a one-time thing, but it ends up being more than that. To later on in the film, Neil is to have told Edie that he works in the metal business, and eventually Edie is to tell him that she is to be some graphic designer, that she is to have only gone on and like done CDs and stuff like that. And so once we get past that, we eventually have Neil, who's to confess to Edie what all he is to have done, and eventually runs away with her, to eventually find at some point that he cannot run away with her, and we'll get to that later. So we go on and we have Chris, who is to make his way home to talk to Ashley Judd's character, who is Charlene. Charlene is very upset that it seems that Chris is not getting the payouts of which for his heist quickly. And Charlene is to say, it's like, well, hey, Chris, for how much you risk your life and how much you're like gambling, like you should really go on, like gambling meaning like risking your life, not like he's a gambler and whatever. But he's become so addicted with going on and risking his life that like the payouts of this aren't going to ever really be good enough. But we also have Charlene that is kind of threatening to take her child and leave Chris, and Chris is to get so upset that he's grabbing things and chucking them within this room. I'm like, man, why can't we have gotten like this kind of Batman? why did we have to get the Batman that we got from Batman Forever? I would have liked this kind of Val Kilmer rather than the Val Kilmer that we got in Batman Forever. It's kind of more aggressive and much more like easily upset. But anyways, so we have Chris who goes to Neil's place and is to be upset with Neil because Neil doesn't have much furniture. And so Neil has to ask Chris, like, well, hey, like, what happened? And so Chris is like, well, hey, like, it seems that Charlene is going to leave me. So Neil goes on and speaks to Charlene and say, like, well, hey, like, you're going to go on and give Chris one more chance. And if this doesn't work out, then go ahead and leave him. But, like, just give him one more chance. Because, of course, Charlene is walking out on Chris with a guy named Alan, and then eventually Vincent is to find out about Alan and is to kind of question him and is to realize that Vincent can use Alan later to try and lure uh, Charlene out to also nab Chris by the end of this film when Chris is to try to get away after doing so many heists. So, and eventually that leads to Charlene needing to forcibly be at this certain place where she is to have to walk out this window to let Chris know that she is here. But Charlene decides instead to go on give Chris this hand signal to tell him to not come in. So Chris eventually leaves, and he is to have a police officer stop him, and Chris to have this different ID. And his hair, of course, to be vastly different by the end of this film than it was earlier. But anyways, so in a very roundabout way, I'm just trying to get to all of the things that happen in this film because there's so much that happens in this film. So we have Neil that eventually is to have stakeouts be done on him and his crew. And so Neil tries to go on and do this heist with a number of guys. And so Michael is to go on and try to adjust this electrical pole, and Chris is go on and break this way into this door. And so what ends up happening is they end up deciding to go through with another heist. But then all of a sudden it seems that at one moment there seems to be this small mistake that ends up happening, this little sound that ends up going off. And Neil is to get so spooked that he decides, like, okay, like, we're not going to go on and do this heist. Let's get the heck out of here. And so, considering all Vincent and all these police officers notice that they have nothing in their hands, that they didn't steal anything, they decide to go on and say, like, okay, well, I guess since we can't arrest them right now because they didn't actually do a crime, and some people are like, well, yeah, they broke into that place. It's like, that seems just like a piddly crime, and like that seems very dumb to try to get them now. So, since Neil is to have the suspicion that he is to be observed, even to the point to where Trejo is to mention that he is getting tailed and he can't shake these officers, and they're on him like a cheap suit and so on and so forth, which isn't the truth. Trejo is just trying to go on and kind of get out of what he's doing with Neil. So we have Neil that goes on to this cargo shipping container lot. He just goes to this entire place where we have all these kind of shipping containers that are usually used for a lot of semis and so on and so forth. A lot of trailer things. So are just massive shipping containers. So we go on and have Neil just kind of pointing at these certain locations, and he's like, yeah, like we're gonna go on and do this, we're gonna be here, and we're gonna go on and do all this. And so all of a sudden we have Vincent, who is to go on and, after these guys have left, look into, like, okay, like, why would they ever go on and steal anything from here? It doesn't make any sense. And Vincent is to start to realize, he's like, oh my god, like, they knew that we were following them, so now they finally decided to follow us, to eventually see who we all are and do their research on us, so that way they'll know. We go on and, of course, have Nate, who is to give Neil the heads up of who Vincent Hanna is, and how Vincent Hanna is to be so good that uh, like Vincent is to have the ability to uh, swing and miss, where Neil doesn't have that opportunity because Vincent is so good, and so on and so forth. So we then go on to eventually set up a number of jobs that are to somehow happen within this film. We have a guy named Kelso, who's played by Tom Noonan, who is to give Neil all this information that he just so happens to have on all these things of paper. And Neil's like, "Are you sure that this information is all right?" And Kelso is like, "Yeah, it's to a T perfect." So we then go on, and by the end of this film, we have Neil going on and doing another heist that happens in this bank. So, and I'm trying to think if there's anything that I had forgotten about at this moment, because there was a lot of stuff that I probably said and whatever. I'm sure there's a number of different backstory things that I probably should have gone on here and said, but I'm also trying to rush through this also, to not have to spend 2.5 hours or 2 hours and 50 minutes talking about this whole entire film. So, and plus just the rush of it all. So we have, before Neil and Vincent go on to do the big bank robbery heist, we even have at some point where, once Vincent and Neil are to know about one another, they eventually just sit down and share a coffee together, where we of course have Vincent that is telling Neil that it's like, well, hey, or Neil goes on and says, it's like, well, hey, like I know you're gonna do your job, but hey, I'm also gonna do mine, and that I know you're gonna I'm gonna go and do my robbery, and you're gonna try to stop me, and that eventually, like, hey, if you get in my way, like I will do anything possible, kill you and whatever, to uh like I will run you over to kind of to get whatever I need. And Vincent, of course, is to share that same kind of sentiment, that, like, the whole tit for tat kind of thing. It's like, well, hey, if you're going to say that you're going to go on and kill me to get me out of the way, I'm going to do the same thing to you. Like, it's like this whole, like, rah, 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 like, I'm going to go on and have the same exchange of, like, kind of stuff to repeat back to you, to say where I'm at, like, to kind of show my confidence. So we also have at some point where both Neil and Vincent are to, like, exchange, like what kind of relationships that they're in. That Vincent is to mention that he had been married 3 times and he's just trying to make it work. And Neil is to mention that he finally found somebody that he hasn't really told her like what he does for a living and so on and so forth. It's like, oh, okay, all right. So we have both of them that just kind of eventually just kind of make their way to separate between the two of them to go on and find out that every single thing that they had surveillance on Neil is to have all been dumped at the same time. That somehow every single bit of this was all like somehow planned to eventually have these guys all be ghosted away from Vincent and the police so they can go on and do their next heist, which of course would be this bank heist. So we go on and have Neil and his group who goes on to do this heist, and they end up doing it fairly well to the point of them being able to run out of this bank with these huge sacks. And they, of course, are to all take off their masks to look like normal people, so that way they can slide into this car and try to make for a getaway. We had Neil talking to a number of these guys before they were to do this job and realize how risky it is. And so Neil is starting to ask a number of these guys before they go into this whether or not they want to go on and do this job because, hey, they have families. They might die doing this. And Chris immediately is to tell Neil, it's like, well, hey, I'm in. Like, if you're going to do it, I'm going to do it. And we also had Michael, who is to say, like, well, yeah, I'm in too. And Neil's like, well, wait a minute. Like, you have a family and, like, maybe you should back out. And Michael's like, no, man, like, I'm in. Like, if you guys are in, so am I. Like, I have, like, this is going to be a big payday and so on and so forth. So we go on and we have all these guys who do this bank robbery get into this car, and here's where the real chase is to go on, because of course Vincent is to figure out which bank they are to rob, and so really it's a bunch of these guys who are to go on and start finding out where the getaway car is, and they of course start to walk closer and closer to it. And so we have the getaway driver, who of course was a short order cooked Arnold, who eventually gets wrapped up into this heist, and so he is to now have to prove that he is a getaway driver. And eventually we go on and have this car who is to be, or that is to be so heavily shot up that eventually these guys have to run off by foot. And of course Donald is to die within this car, a very meaningless short-lived character that we didn't really need in this story. So we go on to have Neil, Chris, Michael being kind of the focused characters here. And so we have the three of these guys running off, and it seems that both Chris and both Neil are kind of close together, whereas Michael is to be eventually to fade off onto his own. And what ends up happening to Michael is Michael ends up at some point trying to shoot down these police officers, and he ends up grabbing a little girl in the process. And then as Michael turns, we have Vincent, who's right there, who has this gun, who fires this one shot to kill Michael, and is to grab the little girl and is to see that she's fine and safe and whatever. So Vincent, of course, to push on to make his way to Neil and Chris, who have made their way into a number of certain areas, as we have at one point Chris, who had gone on to get shot and he went down, and we had Neil, who is to grab onto Chris, and now he's kind of like dragging him along. We have these two characters that even make it through a grocery store parking lot, and so Neil and Chris are running off, and Vincent is to try to like push everybody out of the way as we have these kind of grill explosions and a lot of these explosions that are kind of happening around them as guns are being fired and so on and so forth around these kind of explosive items and so on and so forth, pushing on. So eventually what does happen is Neil and Chris is to grab one of these vehicles within this grocery store parking lot, and they run off together to the point where Vincent just goes back to shoot Michael, and then they can no longer find both Neil and Chris. So we have Neil who takes Chris to this doctor. I believe his name is Dr. Bob, who I believe is actually played by Jeremy Piven. So we have Neil who's talking to Chris, who is telling him that he's going to have to rest for like 6 to 7 hours, but then eventually he's going to have to get back up so that way they can get the heck out of there. And so Nate is preparing all of these like plane tickets and all these things for them to get the heck out of there, to get different IDs and credit cards and all these kind of things for them to just get out. So Neil and Chris are talking, and so Neil is to talk about how Trejo was not with them, and he has some suspicions about that, and that eventually leads to Neil going after Van Zan and shooting him, and asking, of course, where Waingro is, because of course Waingro was to talk to Van Zant about these guys, knowing good and well that the enemy of the enemy is his friend, as far as Waingro is concerned with Van Zant. So eventually, we of course have Neil who's asking where Waingro is, and Van Zant is like, I have no clue where that guy is. We also had Vincent, who was to try to go on and use Hugh Benny's character, which is Henry Rollins' character, as a possible character to dangle over Neil, hoping that Neil would go and want to try to kill Hugh Benny off, as well as Van Zant, who Hugh Benny was to work with Van Zant, but Neil didn't give a about that guy. So we go on to have Neil, who is to collect Edie and tell her what he really does, and we have him driving off, saying that he is now like free and in the clear, and that he's going to run off with Edie and just have the happy ending that he is to want. But instead, Nate is to tell Neil that Waingro is to be in this certain hotel, but is to confirm to Neil, it's like, oh, but you don't care about Waingro, right? Like, you're probably just going to leave him alone. You're just going to go on and just run off, or right off into the sunset. Neil's like, sure, that's what I'll go on and do. But the more and more that just stewed away with Neil, the more he's like, no, I need to go on and kill Waingro. So, come to find out, Neil was to want to go on and pick up Chris, but I guess Chris had already been picked up by Nate, and so Nate went on to give Chris all of this identity and all these kind of things for him to be able to just drive off without Charlene, and we can eventually see Chris, of course, very emotional about the fact that he's going to go on and not be able to make a clean getaway with his wife and kid. And that's how we kind of ended that story. But anyways, we have, of course, Neil that goes after Waingro in this hotel. He ends up doing this fire alarm, and once Neil goes after Waingro and kills him, he then is to almost be attacked by this one police officer. Neil goes on and pushes this officer from behind him and just kind of goes on and just kind of takes this officer out. Then Neil tries to get out of this hotel complex to eventually find Vincent chasing after him. Neil is to realize at this moment that he can't go back into this car with Edie and to ride off into the sunset. So Neil instead decides that he's going to run off to this airplane hangar, where eventually Vincent and Neil are to chase around this airplane hangar, and eventually Vincent is to catch Neil. And Neil, of course, is to have told Vincent before that he'll never go back to jail. He'll never get arrested again. And the obvious ending of this character of him dying is to just be like, of course, he's not going to go. He's not going to go back. He's not going to get arrested. So Vincent, of course, is to hold the hand of Neil as he dies, and so really, in my mind, that is to be like the legitimate ending of this story. But we also have Vincent, who is to have also had to deal with Natalie Portman's character Lauren and her attempted suicide, as Vincent was to make his way to his hotel room where he is, of course, staying at the moment. Because eventually, when Vincent was to have found out about Justine's affair, just showcasing that she just finally is done with Vincent and how he's not really ever there, we have Vincent who leaves to go to this hotel, and Lauren is there, and she is to have cut her wrists and cut parts of her body. So Vincent is to try and tie up parts of this girl's body to cut the circulation off so she would stop bleeding. And so Vincent rushes her to the hospital, where Vincent and Justine are to contemplate whether or not that they can make this relationship work. Where, of course, Vincent is to tell Justine, I don't know if it could ever really work, because really Vincent is to care so much about his job rather than who he's with or his family or anything like that. All that matters is just the case. And even to the point where I found there was to be this kind of interesting, fun moment where Justine was to want to have Vincent go and talk about his cases with her, and Vincent is like, no, I don't think that you can handle like the stuff that I really do on a day-to-day basis. Like, do you really want me to tell you like all the horrors that I've ever seen in my job? Like, no, like I can't say that. I can't do that to you. It's too awful. Like, he goes on and mentions some scenario where a guy was to go on and kill his own child and how horrific that was. And Vincent is like, yeah, there's no way I can go on and tell you all of this. It wouldn't make sense. So, for the most part, I think we've covered most of this movie. At the end of the day, hopefully in some way, I somehow gone on to mention most of this movie. There might have been a huge gapping thing that I completely forgot to say, but I feel like I've covered most of this. And there's a whole lot of other bits of dialogue. There's a lot of things to probably still have covered in this film, and I didn't decide to do that because time and whatever. So let me know in the comments below if there's a number of things that I probably forgot about, because that's always great. I love comments anyways. Also, let me know how you felt about Heat, if this may be your favorite movie, or maybe you hate Heat for some bizarre reason and you want to let me know that, because people have feelings about films. Let let me know also what could be your favorite robbery crime film at the end of the day. But anyways, I think I'm just gonna go on and just get out of here so I can go on and hopefully review one more thing for the day and then call it a day. So goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.